12 species had gathered in the Great Hall, and not one of them thought the human would matter. David Cole walked through the massive doors with his hands clasped behind his back. He was 53 years old. His hair was gray at the temples. He wore a simple dark suit that looked almost plain compared to the glittering armor and flowing ceremonial robes around him. No weapons, no guards. Just one ordinary man stepping into a room full of beings who had conquered stars. The Galactic Assembly Station was the largest structure ever built. It floated at the center of known space, a neutral ground where the great powers came to negotiate, threaten, and occasionally cooperate. For 3,000 years, only the most powerful species had earned seats at the coalition table. And now, somehow, humans had been invited, not welcomed. Invited. There was a difference. High Counselor Sereth of the Drathan Dominion watched the human approach with open disgust. His species stood 8 feet tall, covered in scales harder than steel. They had conquered 11 worlds through pure military strength. Sereth himself had killed enemies with his bare hands more times than he could count. This human looked like something Sereth could break without effort. The representative from Earth, announced the ceremonial speaker, a small Kelthari whose voice echoed through translation devices. Ambassador David Cole. David smiled and gave a small bow. Thank you for having me. It is an honor to stand among such distinguished peoples. Someone laughed. It was the Valori ambassador, a tall being with luminous skin and cold eyes. Distinguished peoples and one lost animal, she said quietly to her aide. Her translator was not supposed to broadcast that comment, but David heard it anyway that he pretended he did not. I bring greetings from Earth, David continued, and a formal petition for trade partnerships and cultural exchange with the coalition. High Counselor Sereth leaned forward in his massive chair. Cultural exchange? What culture could your species possibly offer? You only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. You are infants. Infants grow, David said gently, and we have much to learn from all of you. Learning requires intelligence, Sereth replied. The reports on your species are not encouraging. There were more laughs around the chamber. David simply nodded, as if Sereth had made a reasonable point. Perhaps you could educate us then, he said. I would very much like to understand the Drathan perspective on the universe. Sereth's crest flared with annoyance. He had expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps even fear. This quiet politeness was somehow more irritating than any insult would have been. The session continued for hours. David listened carefully to every speaker. He asked thoughtful questions about trade routes and diplomatic protocols. He showed genuine interest in the history of species that openly mocked him that a young Kelthari attaché named Riss found herself watching him with growing curiosity. Her people were small and considered weak by coalition standards. They had earned their seat through technical brilliance rather than military power. She understood what it felt like to be dismissed, but she had never seen anyone dismissed so completely and remained so calm. When the session ended, David was escorted to quarters on the station's outer ring. The room was small and sparse, suitable for a species of no importance. He thanked the guard politely and stepped inside. Alone at last, David walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars, billions of lights scattered across the infinite darkness. Each one a sun, many of them orbited by worlds full of life. So much beauty, so much possibility that he had been patient today. He would be patient tomorrow, and the day after that. Patience was something humans understood very well. David pressed his hand against the cold glass. For just a moment, his reflection seemed to flicker. Behind his eyes, something vast stirred. Something that remembered when these stars were young. Something that had watched galaxies spin and die and spin again. Then it was gone, and he was just David Cole again. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit, far from home, surrounded by beings who thought he was nothing, that he smiled softly at the stars. One step at a time, he whispered to himself, I in the Great Hall. Riss was gathering her notes when she overheard High Counselor Sereth speaking with the Valori ambassador. The human should withdraw his petition, Sereth growled. Before I teach him what happens to species who forget their place. He seems harmless enough, the Valori replied. Perhaps too harmless. No species is truly that gentle. Sereth laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. He is exactly what he appears. Soft. Weak. A mistake of evolution that somehow stumbled into space. In 3 days, he will leave here with nothing, and humanity will learn that the galaxy has no room for kindness. Riss said nothing, but she looked toward the outer ring where the humans' quarters were located, and she wondered, what kind of being walked into a room full of predators with nothing but a smile? Either the bravest fool in the galaxy, she thought, or something else entirely. 3 days passed, and David Cole did not give up. He attended every session. He listened to every debate. He sat quietly while species with 1,000 years of history explained why humanity had nothing to offer the coalition. And through it all, he remained polite that it was driving High Counselor Sereth insane. Why does he keep coming back? Sereth demanded during a private meeting with his aides. We have given him nothing. We have offered him nothing. Any rational being would have left by now. Perhaps humans are not rational, one aide suggested. Perhaps, Sereth agreed. Or perhaps he is too stupid to understand when he is lost. But deep down, something about the human bothered Sereth. It was the eyes. When David looked at him, there was no fear, no anger, just a quiet attention that felt somehow unsettling, like being watched by something that saw more than it should. Riss, the young Kelthari attaché, had taken to sitting near the human delegation during sessions. There was no human delegation, of course. Just David, alone, representing an entire world with nothing but his voice and his patience. You are very calm, she said to him one morning before the session began. Most new species spend their first summit terrified. David smiled at her. Fear accomplishes very little. I find it easier to simply be present. Present for what? They are never going to approve your petition. Perhaps not today, David agreed. But I am not here only for the petition. Riss tilted her head, curious. Then why are you here? To understand, David said. To listen. To learn what each of these species values and fears and hopes for. How can we be good neighbors if we do not first become good listeners? Riss had no answer for that. In 3,000 years of coalition history, she had never heard any ambassador speak that way. The session that day focused on resource rights in a contested sector. Several species were arguing over mining claims, their voices growing louder and angrier. David watched and listened, occasionally nodding as if he understood their frustrations. When there was a pause, he raised his hand. Yes, the human. The ceremonial speaker said with barely hidden annoyance. You wish to speak? Only to ask a question, if I may. David stood. The sector in question contains enough resources for all parties involved. Has anyone considered a shared development agreement? Each species contributes according to their strengths, and all share equally in the output. Silence. High Counselor Sereth's crest flared red. Shared? The Drathan do not share. We take what we are strong enough to hold. I understand, David said. But consider this. If 3 species fight over a resource field, all 3 suffer casualties and damage. The cost of the conflict may exceed the value of the resources. Cooperation would mean all 3 profit with no losses at all. That is the thinking of prey, Sereth growled. Predators do not cooperate. They dominate. David nodded slowly. On my world, we have predators too. Lions, wolves, sharks, beautiful and powerful creatures. But do you know which species came to rule our planet? Not the strongest, not the fastest, the ones who learned to work together. The chamber was very quiet. Sereth rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the room. Are you lecturing me, human? You, whose species still struggles to colonize its nearest neighbors, dare to lecture the conqueror of 11 worlds. Not lecturing, David said softly. Only sharing a perspective. Your perspective is worthless. Sereth stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Withdraw your petition. Leave the station. Go back to your tiny world and be grateful we do not decide to add it to our collection. David met his gaze without flinching. I respectfully decline, High Counselor. Earth's petition stands. The silence that followed was absolute. No one refused Sereth. No species in 1,000 years had looked into those cold eyes and said no. The Drathan had destroyed civilizations for less, and this small, soft human stood there with his hands clasped peacefully, showing no fear at all. You will regret this, Sereth whispered. Perhaps, David replied. But regret is not a good enough reason to abandon what is right. Sereth turned and stormed out of the chamber. His aides followed quickly, leaving the other delegates in stunned silence. Riss stared at David with wide eyes. Do you understand what you just did? You just made an enemy of the most dangerous being in the coalition. David sat down calmly and folded his hands in his lap. I did not make an enemy. He decided to become one. There is a difference that may cost you your life. David smiled, and for just a moment, Riss thought she saw something ancient flicker behind his eyes, something vast and patient and completely unafraid. Perhaps, he said again, but some things are worth the risk. The banquet hall glowed with 1,000 different lights. Each species had brought their own decorations, their own foods, their own traditions. It was supposed to be a celebration of unity, a chance for delegates to mingle and form connections outside the formal chambers. In reality, it was another battlefield, just with better food. David Cole moved through the crowd like water flowing around stones. He carried a small basket filled with items from Earth: chocolate, coffee beans, a bottle of aged whiskey, small gifts for anyone willing to talk with him. Most were not willing. They turned away when he approached or suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. But a few accepted his offerings with cautious curiosity. "What is this?" asked a Malorian delegate, examining a piece of dark chocolate. "A gift from my world," David said. "Made from a plant called cacao. We mix it with sugar and milk. Many humans find it brings joy." The Malorian sniffed it suspiciously, then took a small bite. His four eyes widened. "This is remarkable. The chemical composition is stimulating multiple pleasure centers simultaneously." David laughed softly. "We call that delicious where I come from." Riss watched from across the room as David made his slow circuit through the gathering. He was rejected more often than not, but he never showed frustration, never showed anger. He simply smiled, nodded politely, and moved on to the next person. It was fascinating and somehow sad. "He tries so hard," she said to herself. High Counselor Sareth was also watching, but with very different emotions. He had been drinking ceremonial spirits for hours. The burning liquid of his homeworld was meant to sharpen warrior instincts, but tonight it only fed his rage. Every time he looked at the human, he felt his crest flush with anger. That small, soft creature had defied him, in front of the entire coalition. And now he walked among them as if nothing had happened, offering gifts and smiles like he belonged there. It was intolerable. David noticed Sareth staring from across the hall. Their eyes met for a moment. David gave a respectful nod. That was the final insult. When the human approached his table carrying the bottle of whiskey, Sareth was ready. "High Counselor," David said warmly. "I brought something from Earth that I thought you might appreciate. This liquid is aged for many years in wooden containers. It develops a complex flavor that many species find. You dare approach me?" Sareth stood so quickly that his chair crashed backward. "After your insults? After your defiance?" The noise in the hall died instantly. Every delegate turned to watch. David took a small step back, his hands raised peacefully. "I meant no insult, Counselor. Only a gesture of respect." "Respect?" Sareth's voice was a thundering growl. "You know nothing of respect. You are an insect pretending to sit at the table of giants. Perhaps we can discuss this calmly." "Enough." Sareth's arm moved faster than most eyes could follow. His massive fist struck David across the face with the full force of Drathan's strength. The impact was devastating. The sound was like thunder cracking. David's body flew across the room. He crashed through a decorative pillar made of polished stone. The pillar shattered into 1,000 pieces. David's body tumbled through the debris and finally came to rest against the far wall, motionless and broken. Riss screamed. Other delegates gasped or looked away. Several quickly began recording for their governments. Sareth walked toward the crumpled form, his steps slow and deliberate. "Let this be a lesson to all primitive species who dream of joining the coalition. Know your place. Accept your weakness, or be destroyed." He stood over David's body, waiting for the final twitches of life to fade away. Drathan could pulverize starship hull plating with their bare hands. No organic being in the galaxy could survive such a blow. And then David Cole stood up. That he rose from the rubble as if he was simply getting out of bed. Slowly, calmly, without urgency. His suit was torn and covered in dust, but his face was untouched. Not a scratch, not a bruise, not a single mark. Sareth stumbled backward, his crest flashing every color of fear. "That," David said quietly, brushing stone powder from his sleeve, "was very unkind." His voice was the same, gentle, patient. But something was different now. Something in his eyes had changed. They were deeper somehow, darker, filled with something that had no name in any language. The lights in the hall began to dim, not failing, not flickering, yielding, making way for something else. David took one step forward, and the most feared warrior in the coalition scrambled backward like a frightened child. "I came here hoping we could be friends," David said. "I asked so little. Courtesy, conversation, a chance." Behind him, his shadow stretched across the floor in ways that made no sense. Too long, too many angles, suggesting shapes that the mind could not process. "But I suppose," David continued softly, "you needed to see what you were really dealing with." The banquet hall had become a cathedral of silence. Every delegate stood frozen. Every recording device captured what no one could explain. The lights continued to dim, pulling back like frightened animals, and in that growing darkness, David Cole began to change, and oh, that was not quite right. He was not changing. He was simply allowing them to see. Sareth pressed himself against a pillar, his massive warrior's body trembling. This could not be happening. He had struck the human with enough force to shatter mountains. Nothing organic could survive that blow. And yet the creature stood before him, patient and unharmed, with stars beginning to gather in his eyes. "What are you?" Sareth whispered. David tilted his head slightly. "That is a complicated question. I am David Cole. I am a human. I am an ambassador from Earth. All of those things are true." He took another step forward. "But I am also something else. Something that chose to walk among you in a form you could understand. Something that hoped kindness would be enough." The shadows behind David deepened. They stretched upward like living things, and within them, shapes began to form. Impossible shapes. Geometries that hurt to look at. Patterns that suggested infinity. Riss fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not know if they were from terror or something else entirely. Something that felt almost like worship. "The universe is very old," David continued. His voice was still gentle, but now it seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from the space between atoms. And consciousness emerged early. Some beings learned, grew, evolved beyond anything you can imagine. We became something new, something vast. The hall disappeared. One moment, they stood surrounded by decorative pillars and banquet tables. The next, they floated in an endless void filled with light. Stars exploded into existence around them. Galaxies spiraled in slow, majestic dances that spanned millions of years compressed into moments. Nebulae bloomed like flowers made of fire and gas. Black holes swallowed light and time and everything that drifted too close. And in the center of it all stood David. Except he was no longer small, that he stretched across the cosmos like a thought-given form. His body was made of light and darkness woven together. His eyes contained galaxies. His heartbeat was the pulse of reality itself. He was beautiful. He was terrifying. He was beyond any word in any language. "We watched your species rise," the cosmic David spoke. His voice was the sound of solar winds and the silence between stars. "We watched all species rise. We celebrated your first discoveries, mourned your wars, hoped for your futures." Sareth screamed. His mind could not process what he was seeing. He was a conqueror, a warrior, the most feared being in the coalition. And now he understood that he was less than dust before this entity. "I came to you in kindness," David said. "I wore this form because I wanted to meet you as equals, to walk among you, to understand you, not as a god looking down, but as a friend looking across." The universe spun around them. Time flowed backward and forward simultaneously. The delegates saw their own worlds from orbit, saw their ancestors taking their first steps, saw futures that might be or might never come. "Every human carries this within them," David continued. "This vastness, this connection to everything that ever was or will be. We are made of star stuff. We hold the universe's memory in our bones. Most of us never awaken to it, but it is always there, sleeping, waiting." The Valori ambassador, who had called humans meat that learned to speak, now wept openly. She understood now how small her contempt had been, how blind. "You struck me," David said, his attention turning to Sareth. "And I could have destroyed you, could have scattered your atoms across 1 billion light years, could have erased your entire species from the timeline." Sareth could not speak, could barely breathe. "But that is not who we are," David said gently. That is not who I choose to be. Destruction is easy. Mercy is the harder path. And mercy is what makes consciousness beautiful. The vision began to fade. The stars dimmed. The infinite void compressed back into the familiar walls of the banquet hall. David stood before them again. Small, human, wearing a torn suit covered in dust. But no one would ever see him as small again. We still come in peace, he said quietly. We always came in peace. But now you understand that peace is a gift we offer, not a weakness we suffer. The lights returned to normal. The recording devices beeped as they tried to process what they had captured, and 100 delegates from 12 species stood in absolute silence, forever changed by what they had witnessed. For a long time, no one moved. The banquet hall that had witnessed the impossible now felt like sacred ground. Delegates stood where they had fallen or frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever fragile reality had returned. David Cole brushed the remaining dust from his shoulders. He looked tired now, not physically, but in some deeper way, as if showing them the truth had cost him something precious. I apologize for the disruption, he said softly. That was not how I wanted this evening to go. High Counselor Sareth remained pressed against the far wall. His massive body trembled with each breath. The most feared warrior in the galaxy looked like a child who had seen a monster in the dark, except the monster had been kind. That was somehow worse. How? Sareth managed to whisper. How is this possible? David walked slowly toward him, and Sareth flinched as if expecting another revelation. But David only stopped a few feet away and looked up at the towering alien with something like compassion. Everything in the universe is connected, David said. Every atom in your body was forged in the heart of a dying star. Every thought in your mind is electricity and chemistry that follows the same laws as lightning and oceans. You are not separate from the cosmos, Sareth. You are the cosmos, experiencing itself. Sareth shook his head. But you are different. You showed us something beyond mortal understanding. Did I? David tilted his head. Or did I simply show you a perspective you had never considered? The universe is infinite. Consciousness is infinite. The only limits are the ones we accept. Rhys approached carefully, her legs still weak from kneeling. Are all humans like you? Can they all do what you did? David smiled gently. All humans carry the same potential. Most never access it. Most never need to. We live our small lives, love our families, build our communities, and that is enough. That is beautiful in its own way. Then why did you show us? The Valori ambassador asked. She had wiped her tears, but her voice still shook. Why reveal yourself? Because you needed to understand. David turned to address the entire hall. For 3 days, I endured your contempt, your mockery, your dismissal. I accepted it because I hoped time and patience would build bridges. He paused, and his expression became sad. But then violence was chosen, and I realized that some lessons cannot be taught gently. Some truths must be shown directly, or they will never be believed. The Malorian delegate who had tasted chocolate earlier stepped forward. What do you want from us? After all we have done, after how we treated you, what do you want? David considered the question carefully before answering. The same thing I wanted when I arrived. Partnership, friendship, a chance to learn from each other and grow together. The universe is vast and old and full of wonders beyond counting. No single species can explore it alone. No single species should have to. But why would you want that? Sareth asked. His voice was small now, broken. You are what you are. You could take anything, do anything. Why would you want friendship with beings so far beneath you? David walked closer to Sareth. He reached up and placed a gentle hand on the massive alien's arm. Sareth flinched, but did not pull away. Because consciousness is lonely, David said. Because even infinite beings crave connection. Because the greatest joy in existence is not power or knowledge or immortality. It is the moment when another mind truly sees you, and you truly see them, and something new is born between you that neither could create alone. Tears began to fall from Sareth's ancient eyes. Warriors of his species did not cry. It was considered the ultimate weakness. But in this moment, he did not care about weakness or strength, he only felt ashamed. I am sorry, Sareth whispered. For what I did. For what I said. For all of it. David nodded slowly. I know. And I forgive you. How can you forgive so easily? I tried to kill you. Forgiveness is not about what you deserve, David replied. It is about who I choose to be. I choose to be someone who believes in second chances, someone who sees the potential for growth in every being, no matter how far they have fallen. He stepped back and addressed the hall one final time. Tomorrow, we will return to the formal chambers. Earth's petition will be considered again. But whatever you decide, I want you to remember this night. Remember that humanity came to you in peace and patience. Remember that we offered kindness before we showed strength. And remember that even now, after everything, we still hope for friendship. David walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. At the door, he paused and looked back. The choice is yours, he said. It has always been yours. We are only here to ask. Then he was gone, leaving behind a room full of beings who would never see the universe the same way again. News travels fast across the galaxy, but fear travels faster. Within hours, every species in the coalition knew what had happened at the banquet. The recordings spread like wildfire, shared across 1,000,000 worlds, analyzed by 1 billion experts, and understood by none of them that a human had been struck by High Counselor Sereth. A human had survived. A human had revealed something that rewrote everything the galaxy thought it knew about reality. The formal session the next morning was unlike any in 3,000 years of coalition history. Every seat was filled. Ambassadors who had never attended a summit suddenly found urgent reasons to be present. Screens throughout the station broadcast the proceedings to audiences numbering in the trillions. And at the center of it all, David Cole sat quietly in his simple dark suit, looking exactly as he had on the first day. High Counselor Sereth entered last. He moved slowly, his massive form somehow diminished. When he took his seat, he did not look at anyone. His crest remained flat against his skull, the color of shame. The ceremonial speaker stepped forward, and for once, there was no condescension in his voice. The coalition recognizes Ambassador David Cole of Earth. Your petition is before us. David stood. Thank you. I will be brief. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had mocked him, ignored him, and tried to kill him. Humanity does not ask for special treatment, he said. We do not ask to be feared or worshipped. We ask only for the chance to be partners, to trade knowledge and culture, to explore the stars together, to build something greater than any of us could build alone. He paused. What happened last night was not a demonstration of power. It was an accident of necessity. I would rather have kept that part of myself hidden forever. I wanted to earn your respect through patience and dialogue, not through revelation. But perhaps, he continued, this is better. Perhaps now we can begin honestly. You know what we are. You know what we are capable of. And you know that despite all of it, we still choose peace. The chamber was absolutely silent. Sereth stood slowly. Every eye turned to him. I wish to speak, he said. His voice was rough, broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical damage. The ceremonial speaker nodded. Sereth faced the assembly. For 11 worlds, I was the conqueror. I believed strength was the only truth. I believed kindness was weakness and mercy was foolishness. He looked at David. I was wrong. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. In 3,000 years, no Drathan had ever publicly admitted error. This human, Sereth continued, showed me something I never wanted to see. Not the vastness of his true form, but the vastness of my own failure. I struck an unarmed being who came in peace. I called primitive a species that carries infinity within them. I was the fool. I was the primitive one. He bowed his head. The Drathan Dominion withdraws all objections to humanity's petition. More than that, we formally request an alliance. Not as conquerors, but as students. We have much to learn from these humans. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the Valori ambassador stood. The Valori collective concurs. We welcome humanity. One by one, species rose. The Kelthari, the Malorians. Species that had laughed at David now pledged partnership. Species that had dismissed humanity now requested cultural exchanges. Within an hour, it was unanimous. Humanity was welcomed into the Galactic Coalition. Not as inferiors climbing to the table of their betters, but as equals. Perhaps, some whispered, as something more. After the session, Riss found David standing at a viewport, looking out at the stars. You changed everything, she said. David smiled softly. No, I only showed them what was always true. They changed themselves. Will you return to Earth? Eventually. But first, I think I would like to visit your world. Learn about your people. Try your food. Hear your music. Riss's eyes widened. You would do that? After everything my species said about humans? Of course. David turned to face her fully. That is what friendship means. We do not hold grudges for ignorance. We offer understanding instead. Riss felt tears building again. You are very strange beings, you humans. Yes, David agreed. We are. But strange is not the same as wrong. Strange is just different. And different is where all beautiful things begin. He looked back at the stars, at the infinite expanse that he had shown them he was part of. The universe is vast, he said quietly, and we have only just begun to explore it together. Somewhere in the distance, a new ship prepared to launch toward Earth. The first official diplomatic vessel from the Galactic Coalition. The first of many, and on 100 worlds, beings looked up at their night skies and wondered what else might be out there. What other infinities walked among them, wearing humble forms, offering kindness instead of conquest? The answer, David knew, was more than anyone could imagine. But they would learn. They had time. They had forever.